Добрый день. Начинаем наш традиционный
Good afternoon.
брифинг с подключением
Let
российских
us
и зарубежных
start our traditional
журналистов. И
briefing
так,
engaging Russian and foreign
график министра
journalists.
иностранных
Let
дел
us
Российской
start with the
Федерации
foreign
Максим
minister's
Лаврова
schedule.
27-28
On the
ноября министр
27th and
иностранных дел
28th of November, Foreign
Федерации
Minister
Сергей
of
Лавров
Russia, Sergei
будет
Lavrov,
принять
will
участие
pay a visit to
в
Minsk
совместном
to take
заседании
part in the joint
коллегии
session of the
Министерств иностранных
colleges
дел
of the
России
Russian
и
and Belarus
Белоруссии.
foreign
Запланирована
ministries.
его встреча с
He
президентом
will have a meeting with
Беларуси
the
и
president
главой
of
государства
Belarus,
иностранных
and
дел
he will also
Российской
have talks with
Федерации.
foreign minister of this
Совместные
country.
заседания коллегии
Joint sessions of
России
the
и Беларуси
foreign ministries'
проводятся
colleges of Russia and Belarus
ежегодно,
are
начиная
taking
с
place on
2000
an
года.
annual basis
Являются
since
эффективным
2000.
средством
They
синхронизации
are an
усилий
efficient
международного
mechanism to
образования.
harmonize the
В
efforts of the
рамках
two countries on
предстоящего
the international
заседания
arena. The upcoming meeting will discuss the implementation of the program of agreed actions in foreign policy of the states parties to the Treaty on Union State for 2022-2023. It will cover cooperation in foreign political planning, coordination with respect to the EU, NATO, the Council of Europe, our joint efforts in the OSCE, interaction on multilateral platforms on arms control, and confronting Western policy to politicize international economic and human rights organizations. The session marks an important date in the shared history of Russia and Belarus, 220th anniversary of the victory in the Patriotic War in 1812, and the defeat of Napoleon in the Berezina River. The Foreign Ministry of Belarus plans to host an exhibition and the presentation of the publishing project of the Permanent Committee of the Union State. The meeting will result in a decree of the colleges, the Foreign Ministry consultations plan for 2023, and the intergovernmental MOU on biological security. On the 30th of November, Foreign Minister Lavrov will hold a traditional meeting with the participants of the annual scientific and educational program of Gorshikov Public Diplomacy Fund, Dialogue for Future. At this discussion platform, young experts from Russia and foreign countries have an open exchange of views on various aspects of international relations, and this year the program is dedicated to global security. It will engage over 60 representatives of public and political circles, both from the CIS and other foreign states. At the meeting with the ministers, they will discuss topical issues of global policy, the situation in certain regions, and they will receive answers to their questions of interest. Moving on to Ukraine, let me draw your attention to the two dates in the history of modern Ukraine, I would say, but let me say of the region. And these dates are the 21st and the 22nd of November. They have to do with the beginning of the two Maidans, so to speak. Basically, we're talking about two coups d'etats that were orchestrated by the West, and they took place in the territory of the state of Ukraine. As a result, they deprived Ukraine of its independence. Over the past decades, the US and its allies sought to have full control over the Ukrainian territory and putting an end to its attempts to sovereignty and turning it into an obedient tool of an anti-Russian policy and a military foothold to fight against Russia. The so-called Orange Revolution of 2004 and the illegal third round of election was a precursor for the armed anti-constitutional coup in 2014. Back in the day, the West managed to put to power rampant national radicals. They hated everything that had to do with Russian, and it made them obedient puppets that are capable to make any destructive steps for Ukraine. After that, following these two landmark events, negative landmark events for the history of Ukraine, an actor was brought to power and he had to play a certain role in history. And he did play this role, although this role was bloody. Today, the Zelensky regime, without any thinking, implements everything that the West dictates him to do. namely continuing hostilities till the victory, until the last Ukrainian. He is ready to sacrifice the life and future of its citizens for the financial and military aid to continue. Without this assistance, the Kiev authorities would not last for a day. It's an open secret that the armed forces of Ukraine depend on the supplies of Western weapons, intelligence, instructors, and mercenaries. There is an increasing number of facts that show that there is an ongoing standoff between Russia and NATO in the Ukrainian territories. An increasing number of military experts from NATO are fighting in private military companies and the armed forces of Ukraine. According to various sources, since February, the US supplied to Kyiv weapons, including heavy artillery and MLRS, worth 21.5 billion USD, and the EU supplied weapons for 8 billion euros following the 7th session of the Defense Contact Group within the Ramstein format. Another package of military assistance to Kyiv was agreed upon with a focus on the missile defense and the air defense. But it's not all about what we see, what we hear, and what we've been told. There's another side of the medal that is concealed from the public, from both the regional and the international public. What is happening is also a screen for the financial shenanigans of the White House in order to drag NATO even further to the conflict, so that even more money and opportunities are supplied to the Zelensky regime. It deliberately makes dangerous provocations and extremism, introducing the elements of terrorist activities into its campaign. We have repeatedly talked about failed attempts to accuse Russia in its involvement into a missile crash in the Polish territory on the 15th of November, but it wasn't enough for Kiev. The Ukrainian armed forces attacked the nuclear power plant in Zaporozhye. During the latest shellings, a number of facilities was damaged, including the ones that store radioactive waste. And even children understand the repercussions. The Kiev regime continues to blackmail the Europeans with the man-made disaster. That is exactly what is happening, and it is not a threat against us. We have long realized this threat, and we have been combating this threat, but it is all made for the West, for the part of the European continent who at first was obedient to its big brother in the West and participated in the coup d'etat directly in Ukraine. After that, it supported larger democratic transformations in this country. For some reason, it strengthened the dictatorship and the totalitarian regime and abandoning of democracy and freedoms. And now it has to invest a lot for this mayhem. And the Zelensky regime regularly reminds them that it is capable of shelling nuclear power plants. If somebody in the West, or namely Western Europe, has some doubts, that it wants to ask itself, what is the aim of the investment? Whether they are party to the conflict, whether they are just sponsoring this bloodshed, immediately they will be reminded of the right answer when there is another shelling of the nuclear power plant. That is indeed a nuclear blackmail, as it is. Probably it is unprecedented in the history, and here we should pay tribute to Zelensky and his creative spirit. He's being paid lavishly from the West. And Europe is mum and blind to what is going on in its territory. On the 21st of November, Zelensky addressed NATO Parliamentary Assembly and he urged once again to support Ukrainians' bid for the membership. Kyiv is convinced that amid the war with Russia, NATO and the EU are obliged to welcome Ukraine. But do you understand the repercussions? Does the EU understand the repercussions? That is the only thing that somehow shows that a number of political officials in the EU still have some reason, still have some common sense, and they can calculate the risks, at least to some extent. At the same time, the Ukrainian authorities do not want to implement the accession requirements, and this is confirmed by the following. Zelensky signed a decree cancelling the lifelong financial monitoring with regard to politicians and senior officials. By doing so, Kyiv made it clear that it does not seek to fight corruption and money laundering. On the contrary, it wants to have more money from the West. It wouldn't fight corruption, it just fenced off those in Ukraine, those in Kyiv, those in the bunker, who participate in financial shenanigans, machinations, and financial fraud from the US. He just gave a green light to everything that is called as corruption by the international community, and that's it. At the same time, the West tries to turn a blind eye to the terrorist methods used by Ukraine during hostilities, during the atrocities by Ukrainian neo-Nazis against Russian prisoners of war and locals that lived in the territories controlled by Russia. The atrocities resemble crimes by fascists, and that is appalling. Recently, the world saw horrendous footage of unarmed Russian prisoners of war that were shot down in Makeyevka. Well, they wanted, these Western journalists wanted to be unbiased because the Kyiv regime announced the investigation will be conducted, but after that, there was a blow on the liberal world that was supported for many years, that was supporting the Kyiv regime and presenting it as a beacon of democracy. The Kyiv regime claimed that the Russian servicemen are to blame for the death of these prisoners of war, as if they killed themselves, as if they shot themselves. But the video is all there on the internet. That is just crazy and immoral at an unparalleled scale. In its daily efforts, the Kyiv regime has been guided by its patrons and actually by the heroes of neo-Nazis. They commemorate their birthdays, they celebrate it. So here we see the resemblance. It's not that we suppose it. It is confirmed by the Kyiv regime. But there is a different problem. The longer we go, the more resemblance we see with other types of atrocities, the atrocities of modern terrorism. Previously, we saw the same kind of footage from the hotbeds of international terrorism, the Islamic State, Jabhat al-Nusra, Al-Qaeda, and the like. Currently, it is Zelensky and his regime that is dealing with such kind of atrocities. Just compare these materials. There are plenty of them. We have seen it in our country, the atrocities of terrorists in Northern Caucasus in 1990s, and it is just the same kind of situation, 100% resemblance. And the West supported those who were left in Northern Caucasus, who were deployed in Northern Caucasus by them, and by the same token, they shot our guys, the ones that were unarmed, the ones that were taken hostage, the ones that faced this difficult situation. They were shot down. And in the same vein, the West is talking about the democracy in the Kiev regime. And in the same vein, the West was supporting Dudayev, Maskhadov, and all other terrorists. Years have passed till the international community, namely the collective and civilized West, since they faced the same means of combating against themselves, because these very international terrorists that were nurtured in one center, they came to Europe, and Europe was appalled when it saw a wave of terrorist attacks in favorable capitals, Paris, Berlin. There were loads of cities in Central and Eastern Europe that faced terrorist attacks. And they had to recognize that in mid-1990s, Russia was confronting terrorist attacks. They didn't recognize that they were involved, but they didn't have any grounds to say, to justify those who were sowing terror and to call them freedom fighters and democracy fighters. The same will be witnessed today. Just give us some time. The methods of the Kiev regime and its representatives will be recognized as terrorists and extremists, because there is no other way, because it is all recorded. And of course, they will face a tribunal. But let me highlight once again, the West will not have a chance to whitewash from a part that has become a part of its activities. They have developed this regime, and they are sponsoring those who perpetrate terrorist and extremist acts. By the way, not so long ago, a new video footage was published on the internet where the Ukrainian fighters are bullying a living human who is tied up in a coffin. Inglorious bastards, that's the only thing I can say. But once again, nothing will be left behind, nothing will not be investigated, and everything will be punished. As she commented on the Ukrainian Nazis and the bullying and torture of Russian servicemen, the US Ambassador at Large for Global Criminal Justice, Beth Van Schok, stated that, with regard to the scale of violence, our armed forces allegedly exceed the armed forces of Ukraine. So, isn't it a shift in the humanitarian aspect? And we see that she is measuring it on the scale and not giving any assessment to specific facts. Why don't you recall your own actions? The US State Department gives an assessment in terms of comparison. In this case, you could recall your own actions and ask yourself, when it comes to Vietnam, were the US troops more violent than the Ukrainian troops? You should compare them to yourselves. It is odd to hear such cynical statements from a professional attorney. Beth Van Schok's words have no morality, have no compassion, but mainly it has nothing that falls within her professional purview. Professionalism. She has only one goal: to shield and to whitewash Ukrainian criminals that the US and its allies are training and equipping with all the necessary What is the goal behind it? They have the goals of financial fraud by the US administration, and that has been stated by American journalists that have no connection whatsoever with either Russia or other countries, and that has been talked about within the United States, because there is a material evidence. A huge number of these funds that are allocated to Ukraine come back to where they came from. For 8 years, since 2014, we have been stating it on a number of occasions. The assistance that went to support the Kiev regime, and back in the day they were hiding behind humanitarian goals, democratic development and assistance to democracy in Ukraine. We have provided specific facts on a number of occasions that this money do not end up to the end users, and they just go to the Kiev regime accounts, and immediately they go straight to the accounts of Western officials.
Such an attitude of the West consolidates the assurance of the Kiev regime in their impunity. The West not only supports the killers who could not have any mercy, they become engaged in such atrocities. This proves that all the declared objectives will be performed. We had a lot of questions concerning the results of our our participation in G20 in Bali. I would like to remind that in November 15-16 of this year, there was a summit. So we summoned all these questions, and we would like to provide a comprehensive answer. The summit, the G20 summit, has become an important milestone in international cooperation. We are glad that inaction, which existed because of the collective West, was overcome. We see it's an attempt of our Indonesian chairmanship, as well as of our upper partners with the developing economy. We are satisfied with the declaration of leaders, which was agreed during this hard geopolitical situation. We perceive the positive results at the summit as a victory of common sense. So G20 made a significant contribution and effectively responded to multiple challenges in the world economy. We believe that this leading forum should continue to be focused on searching a common ground, but rather than become a platform for repercussions and accusations. We mentioned that the attempts of the West to impose their false assessment concerning the situation in Ukraine. So this separate paragraph, which reflects divergent opinions, was shown. At the same time, the participants showed their common understanding of the situation. So that is why talking about isolation of Russia at international forums is senseless and surprising. So Russia remains a leading actor at the international arena. So Minister of Foreign Affairs Sergei Lavrov maintained numerous contacts. He had bilateral meetings with the heads of governments and states of Argentina, India, Indonesia, Saudi Arabia, Senegal, South African Republic, as well as he also held negotiations with the Secretary General of the UN and other colleagues from foreign embassies. Food security was at the forefront of discussions. The stability of agricultural markets this situation has deteriorated. This dangerous trend is aggravated by the destructive steps of the West, which provoked the world inflation and banned Russian supplies of food and fertilizers abroad. In statements of the UN Secretary General, as well as of the leaders of developing states, raised an issue on lifting artificial obstructions by the US, the European Union, obstructions to the export of the Russian grain agreed by the Istanbul agreements. In the context of this declaration, we also fixed the free transfer of export to developing states, as well as fertilizers detained illegally in the European Union ports. Other constructive agreements, first of all, concerning energy security, healthcare, digital transformation, is also a good sign. Together with the BRICS Plus countries, we reaffirmed the focus on retaining the open character of world economy. We also provided initiatives to ensure access to energy, including through loans, through the use of all sources of energy. We also underlined a central role of the World Health Organization and its leading function in relation to this World Pandemic Fund. We believe that its activity will be implemented in a transparent and inclusive manner. In general, we can make a positive assessment of this summit. We can state that the world does not resist to this international pressure, so this makes it possible to find a common ground for mutually beneficial cooperation. And we would like to develop such cooperation under the aegis of the Indonesian chairmanship, which promote a slogan of common planet, community, and future. And we are ready to its effective implementation together with our colleagues within G20. A number of materials related to humanitarian track. Last week in Budapest, we held events titled Russian Literature, Modern Readings, with participation of Russian writers. And some books of the participants of this event were translated into Hungarian and are very successful. This literature program included roundtables with participation of the relevant community, literary translators and publishers, as well as addresses in front of schools, the opening of the photo exhibition. The Russian delegation also met the president of the State Assembly of Hungary, Sándor Lezsák. He is also an honored president of the Association for the Hungarian-Russian Cooperation, named after Nikolai Tolstoy. As for other issues, together with the Ministry of Culture, we continue systematic work on promotion of our culture abroad. Since 15 and 19 November in Zambia, Tanzania, and Africa, held a festival in the African states. They held events on the promotion of the diversity of cultural heritage. Moreover, we also organized a thematic photo exhibition on picturesque sites of the north of the country. The festival became a prominent event and enforced the strengthening of intercultural cooperation with the African continent in the run-up to the second Russia-Africa summit to be held in St. Petersburg in 2023. Between 21st and 28th November in Delhi, Calcutta, and Mumbai, the Festival of the Russian Culture in India is held. This event is linked with the 75th anniversary of diplomatic relations between Russia and India. The program of the festival includes performances of Russian teams representing folk art of Russia. And the UNESCO telecommunication program started today. This is the only forum aimed at protecting the freedom of speech and supporting independent SME in developing countries. I would like to say that during the statements of Russian representatives, the fact that our representatives of Ministry of Foreign Affairs, I mean a number of our delegates, did not receive visa, and that this fact will be reflected in the final declaration. So, talking about the freedom of expression within this organization based in Paris, under the condition of lack of experts because of visa requirements, because of the position, is rather strange and even absurd. So we need to define in UNESCO, I believe, either we are for pluralism, the freedom of expression, and we will defend it and show everyone, to the citizens of all the countries, that we have this objective. So we need to do this collectively, together, or we will invite, on a selective basis, some specialists who can assess the situation from their own point of view, as well as express alternative points of view, and maybe not even alternative, but the points of view of the majority. And we believe that the presence at the international platforms, when we speak about the United Nations, should be ensured in full format by the country who hosts such an event and who gave guarantees to organize any UN event will be implemented in accordance with the adequate standards. So right now we see quite the opposite thing. So that is why full participation of the Russian delegation in the work of this session was undermined, and we can say it openly. Why and what was the reason? I believe that our intention for inclusive development in the mass media, I believe that that is the reason the French party prolongs the delivery of visas. And I can say that these are top experts who participated in the elaboration of the documents of UNESCO. These are people who are professionals, real professionals. So that is why we urge Paris to implement their obligations in good faith and its privileges and immunities from July the 2nd, 1954, in particular concerning the ensuring unimpeded access of delegates to the conference and sessions. And of course, this case will be informed to the head secretariat in New York. As of November 19, 100 years was of Mr. Knorozov. During his work in the Museum of Ethnography, he made a milestone discovery which was recognized at the international level. He deciphered the glyphs of Maya. So we plan to organize the anniversary of this prominent scientist, both in Russia and abroad. Commemorative events were held in the scientific Knorozov Center of Mesoamerican Studies in the Russian State University of Humanities. All Russia State Library for Foreign Literature, named after Ivanovna Rodumino, made a significant contribution. The REACH program includes the participation of all countries with the main focus of Latin America. So in the National Museum of Anthropology in Mexico, which is, by the way, a very good museum, our embassy and Rossотрудничество unveiled a bust of a Soviet scientist. So we did it together with our hosting partners. So we made our utmost to draw attention to such an event. Among other cultural events are knowledge of readings, thematic publications, conferences, photo exhibitions, as well as the opening of the honored consulate of the Russian Federation in the states of Yucatan, Chiapas, and Campeche. All this was dedicated to this momentous date. On the 25th and 27th of November, a forum of young civil services of the was held with the more full involvement of their creational potential. This platform will provide an opinion for an exchange of experience. Young diplomats will participate in such an event. During this event, our minister will deliver his welcoming address. On the 25th of November, 80 years ago, in Moscow, there was signed an agreement between the Red Army, the signing of the agreement on the participation of the French regiments in operations and combat operations with the Soviet Union. The document provided that the command of the Free France will send its air squadron for joint activities with the Red Army against the common enemy. The Soviet command will send equipment to the French fighter squadron in order to ensure maximum success. On December the 1st, Pravda newspaper published news on the arrival of the French pilots. In March 1943, these pilots, after several months of training, were sent to the Western Front. So they passed a glorious battlefield from the Kursk Bulge to Königsberg. For combat achievements and courage during crossing the Neman River in autumn 1944, by the decree of the Supreme Command, the regiment was awarded with the honored title Normandy Neman. The French pilots flew more than 52,000 combat missions. They shot down about 273 aircraft and damaged about 50. During these fights, 42 pilots were killed. This regiment was awarded with the Red Banner orders of Alexander Nevsky. They also received the titles of Heroes of the Soviet Union. The participation of the French pilots in combat activities with the Red Army became one of the vivid examples of our fruitful cooperation between our countries during the Great Patriotic War. And then another important date, in 1925, in accordance with the decree of the Russian Federation, we will celebrate a 270th anniversary of the Moscow State University. As one of the main pillars of fundamental education, this university made a significant contribution to the development of international humanitarian cooperation. He raised a number of prominent scientists, state and political figures who hold various positions in foreign states. Currently, we are preparing for the anniversary of this momentous event, and in 2023, anniversary events will be held. The international component of this event provides for scientific conferences, exhibitions, meetings of rectors and alumni. A forum dialogue East-West with the participation of Western scientists will also be held. Our Russian missions will make a significant contribution. We are confident that this meeting will bring together many countries and generations and will allow, in the atmosphere of friendship and mutual understanding, to remember the best days of the student years spent in our country, as well as discuss topical issues of the modern times. The MSU alumnus have always remained an intellectual elite of Russia, first of all of our country and abroad. They demonstrate high standards of the Russian education. I would like to mention that this university brings together many employees of the Russian foreign ministry. So now I'm ready to answer your question. Good afternoon, Madam Zakharova. As for the elections in Kazakhstan, first of all, I would like to congratulate Kazakhstan with the successful elections. Our Russian observers saw the victory of Mr. Tokayev with results 81.31% of votes. His victory showed that his program of building new Kazakhstan to comprehensively transform the country has received the wide support of the country. Many observers, about 650 observers from different international organizations, including CSTO, SCO, were present. The President of the Russian Federation sent to the President of Kazakhstan his congratulations. He mentioned convincing level of confidence which opens new possibilities to implement the relations of strategic which are based on the principles of good neighborship, mutual cooperation. So we will also work together to develop them and to overcome the issues which emerge in the context of new challenges, and so on and so forth.
Of course, there were positive assessments of the observer missions, with the rare exception of the ODIHR mission, but without it, we wouldn't receive a full picture of events. Their assessments lack impartiality, and concerns are raised with regard to the proficiency and professionalism of this institution. This biased position has been a permanent trend in the work of this institution, and we have drawn the attention to this various times, many times, and we call on everyone to update the methodology for observing the elections within the CIS space. I used the term methodology to outline the direction. It was our intention to develop collectively a genuine methodology, to frame it, to shape it, to develop it, to understand the tools and means that the ODIHR is using to assess electoral processes, because at the current stage, the word methodology is used without any grounds whatsoever. We do not understand, just like anybody else, what kind of methodology it is that gives totally different results, and that is so detached from reality. Do you have any other questions? Yes, indeed. Not so long ago, an official spokesperson of Pakistan Foreign Minister drew the attention to the statement by Russian Senator Igor Morozov on alleged Kiev interest to the Pakistan nuclear weapons and the discussions that took place in this regard. Could you please comment on this? Well, we call on the Pakistani colleagues to be guided by the Russian official position on this matter. Since we are talking about my colleagues, an official spokesperson of the Pakistani MFA, we're always open to clarify any issues via our working diplomatic channels. That's the first thing. Secondly, we chose a diplomatic, a democratic way of doing business, and there are a plethora of people who are in charge of international and regional cooperation. They have various viewpoints, they have different assessments. Moreover, they are dealing with research as scientists, as scholars, as the experts, and each of them is entitled to their own viewpoint as a political scientist, as a public figure, as a politician. That is why I believe that you should treat it in that way. Once again, let me emphasize that we are keeping in touch permanently with our Pakistani counterparts, and we are ready to clarify all the matters at the working level. Thanks a lot. Do we have Россия сегодня, Russia Today with us? Good afternoon, Madam Zakharova. What's your take on the London's position? On the one hand, according to the media reports, it continues purchasing Russian oil and calling other countries importers. On the other hand, it sends precision missiles to Ukraine. Well, that has been their hallmark. Hypocrisy has always been an intrinsic feature of the English foreign policy, historic-wise, or Britain in modern times. That has been their feature all along. They say one thing, but they don't walk the walk. Hypocrisy has always been a feature of British political establishment, but it is important to remember that the calls to join hands against some kind of a Russian threat, it's just about an evil game where London does not wish to sacrifice its own economy. It's not the first time we see that. They have always tried to damage bilateral relationship, to damage their rivals, and naturally European countries and the EU that it left. These are the top rivals for them. They try to derail the sustainable ties in terms of energy. On the other hand, they do not want to abandon what benefits them. And we don't have any questions to them. We have questions to others, to other countries. They see the behavior of London within the EU and the painful Brexit. On the one hand, it was selfish for London, and it was painful for the rest of the EU. This painful Brexit that we have seen, and all these facts notwithstanding, they still take note of such piece of advice from Downing Street and other official institutions. Suffice it to take a look at the plight of the Baltic states. Its population is put at the brink of survival. And you should ask yourself, how long will they follow this advice, suicidal advice by their big brothers in London? Because within their strategy, London sees this collateral damage as an acceptable cost for some mottos on common and shared values. Western partners of the UK should think why they should sacrifice the well-being of their citizens. If they believe that this serves democracy, freedom, and values, they are wrong, because the situation in Ukraine is the result of their interference in this country, undermining the constitutional order, multiple coups d'etat, and the corruption among the Ukrainian establishment, introduction of their people into Ukrainian political establishment. So it has nothing to do with the shared values or international law. That is a blow to the international law. So they shouldn't hide behind this. Maybe they just try to play up to their attempts to isolate our country and to continue nurture the Ukrainian neonationalism, for it to become a common problem for Europe, including for the EU, that London quit. Maybe they should search for the answers in their ranks. Do you have any other questions? If no, let's move on to Reuters. Good day, Madam Zakharova. Hello. A first question has to do with a statement by Sergei Ryabkov that he made last week, last Friday. He said that Russia and the US have not come to common denominator regarding the exchange of prisoners. A lot has been said about it. And in this regard, let me ask you the following. What is the obstacle behind it? And what are the main differences between Russia and the US when it comes to prison exchange? We have repeatedly said that we do not comment on our contacts and the essence of the contacts. We are ready to confirm that this negotiating process is ongoing. We are ready to reaffirm that we are open to addressing these matters because these kind of issues were a priority for us, and it has been the case for many years. We are ready to reaffirm it and to comment on that. As for the sense of negotiations, it is quite a sensitive matter. It has to do with personal data and the future of people, many things that should not be made public for this negotiating process to lead to some specific results that would suit us. So I'm really sorry, but I would not comment on the crux of the matter, just like other parties to the negotiating do not comment on it. In this case, I would just voice the second question, although I get a sense that we'll have the same kind of answer, the same statement. In his statement, Sergei Ryabkov said that Viktor But is one of those who is in the list of negotiations. What are the other names? There's an imbalance of information because we know a lot about the Americans, Ryan Whelan, and so on, but we do not know much about Russians, except for Viktor But. But that is because of our position. We do not discuss it publicly. Unfortunately, Reuters was not among the media outlets who was keeping track of Russian citizens and their future who were detained, arrested, seized by the US illegally. But we have been talking about it for many years, and we urge them to improve their well-being and their living conditions, because it was beyond the commitments undertaken by Western countries. Back in the day, it was not of interest to you. I could hardly find any materials by your agency that would make reference to our statements. So you shouldn't search for duality in our position. You should search for duality in your position. Since we're talking about this matter, I have another question regarding Russians that were detained in Sweden, not in the US. Yesterday, we saw reports that Swedish authorities said that some people were detained. According to them, these people were working for the main intelligence office of Russia. They were not named, but allegedly these were Sergei Skvortsov and Veronika Kulikova. Could you confirm this data? Maybe you got some reports from your embassy. What's your take on that? I got it. Well, first, we believe that those publications in Swedish media are a part of a general anti-Russian hysteria by the collective West. In certain countries, this Russophobic campaign turned into a genuine spy mania. So many of the reports that are published currently, and these reports in particular, is something that we believe to be innuendo. We have dispelled and debunked these publications regarding submarines and so on. There are a lot of fake news. We even found Soviet-era materials. First, they start with fake news in media, and in a month's time or year's time, truth is revealed, and the Swedish investigators find out that Russia has nothing to do with that, but this information is not presented as some breaking news. And in this case, no official data has been provided by the Swedish authorities to Russia. We take note of the statement by the Swedish police that does not identify these persons, their nationality, or the country for which they were spying. And at the same time, via official channels, there have been no information whatsoever. End of story. Certainly, we carefully treat human rights of our citizens, and via our missions abroad, should need be, we provide all the necessary assistance that even goes beyond what is required, and that is the current state of affairs. CGTN, Chinese Media Corporation, are you here with us? Yes, Madam Zakharova, we have two questions. The US and its allies are planning to agree on the price cap for Russian oil. Lately, we have seen reports that there are active discussions. They're discussing $60, $70 per barrel. At the same time, traders in the EU try to purchase Russian oil in advance before this embargo comes into effect. Rotterdam, Amsterdam, Antwerp purchased Russian oil 126% more than a month before. What's your take on that? We have repeatedly stated that imposing a price cap on Russian oil is an anti-market measure. It disrupts supply chains and it can significantly exacerbate the situation on global energy markets. Russia does not seek to provide oil supplies to those countries who wish to join this cartel of buyers. Let me emphasize that many oil-producing countries stand against these measures because they understand full well that today this measure is aimed against Russia, and tomorrow, for some political or economic grounds, it could be used against any other country. This blatant price dictate undermines global trade. It creates a dangerous precedent not only on energy markets, but also for the international trade per se. You have seen and you have heard the statements of many Western officials, for instance, Joseph Borrell, many officials in the EU and in the West, that the prosperity of the EU was built on Russian energy sources, that they received it on favorable prices, and this was a win-win situation, but primarily it was beneficial for them. They were interested in this situation because they were consumers and they developed their economies basing on that. And now the situation has come to an end, and you understand the reason behind this price dictate. The West does not wish to say goodbye to its prosperity and to its arrogant life. At the same time, they do not wish to pay. That's it. Banditism, blatant banditism, that's what it is. As for the volumes of oil production, Russia continues its constructive cooperation with OPEC Plus partners in order to stabilize oil markets. A price hike and the purchase of Russian oil products before the embargo that you have mentioned only shows that unilateral restrictions by the West and its policy to politicize the energy cooperation is detrimental to the economy of all countries, including those who trigger these illegal measures. As for the moral side of the matter, it tells a lot. It tells volumes. It will trigger global economic recession that will hit all global economy, including developed countries. If this concept is implemented, there would be irreversible consequences, and we would recall what we said these very days. Do you have any other questions? Yes, another one. You have mentioned that the volume of military assistance to Ukraine by the US exceeded 20 billion USD. You said $21 billion. At the same time, Western media said that by November, the US is in short supply of some weapons, for instance, 122 millimeters caliber weapons, Stinger systems, HARM, and some anti-tank missiles. At the same time, Lloyd Austin said that the US would support Ukraine as much as it is necessary. How would you comment on that? Okay, I beg your pardon. You know what? For starters, something is wrong with this world. When two ladies are discussing Stingers, MLRS, anti-tank missiles, HARM missiles, that's for sure. But getting back to your question, let me say that we have outlined our principled position on this matter repeatedly, providing more supplies to Kiev and a direct control over armed forces of Ukraine, including providing intelligence in real time by the US, basically made the US a party to the conflict. That has been said by everyone, both by Russian ambassador to the US, Antonov, as he was talking to the US, as well as officials in Moscow. We talked about it at international platforms, including at briefings. On the 29th of September this year, we have provided our basic assessments. As for the fuss, the domestic fuss, who pays for what, and what is in short supply, what is in abundance, that's not up to us, it's up to them and the games that they play between each other. But we provided our assessment of this.
Is Kurdistan 24 with us? Kurdistan 24. Good afternoon, Madam Zakharova. We haven't seen you for ages. On the 20th of November, the Iranian artillery and drones started bombing various settlements in the Iraq Kurdistan. And Turkey started bombing the northern Syria. Among them, there are civilians. So, what is Russia's position towards this bombing of civilian settlements and schools in Iraq, Kurdistan, and that Turkey holds an operation in northern Syria? Of course, our country is concerned by the military escalation of the situation in northern Syria. It is fraught with future instability in this Iran and Syrian border. Such an aggravation is of course, is led by, was caused by the Iranian movement when it occupied the territory of Iraq. That was the main reason when Iraq became a hotbed for terrorism. And now these hotbeds are used to provide tensions in the Islamic Republic. As we know, these rocket strikes were against training facilities and bases of the Iraq in the Iraq territory, which are recognized as terrorist. We are also concerned by the events in northern Syria in the context of the Turkish operation. So we see that the reason is illegitimate presence of the military contingent of the US in the Syrian Arab Republic. I refer to the northeast part. as well as inability of Syria in this region. We support tight contacts with the Turkish side on this issue. We understand concerns of Turkey with respect to threats to its national security. At the same time, we believe that this land operation on the territory of Syria will trigger terrorist activity. We believe that the best solution of all security issues is a direct dialogue between Turkish and Syrian authorities. Both Turkey and Iran are friendly countries to us. They were exposed to terrorist attacks, so they defend their national security. So at the same time, we believe that these should be actions, anti-terrorist actions without any ideological or political pretext. And if necessary, these actions should be agreed and coordinated with the governments of the states, more specifically the states of Syria and Iraq, which are friendly to us. Such an approach will help to avoid victims among civilians and minimize humanitarian risks. If you don't have any questions, so maybe Anadolu has any questions. Yes, good afternoon, Madam Zakharova. We have 3 questions today. The first question concerns the grain deal. Last week, Mr. Vershinin сказал that about 208 tons of Russian fertilizers were blocked in Latvia, Estonia, Belgium, and the Netherlands. He also said that they managed to agree the export of 20,000 tons of fertilizers to Malawi. Do you have any information on how much fertilizers are blocked and in which countries? And what are latest news with regard to implementation of the Russian part of obligations under this grain deal? We can say that Rebecca Greenspan and the World Food Programme experts make every effort to implement our initiative on free transfer of Russian fertilizers to the poorest countries. I would like to once again remind and underline that we speak only about the humanitarian event, which has been blocked throughout 3 months by the European countries above mentioned. This is Latvia, Estonia, Belgium, and the Netherlands. They detain the Russian foods in their own ports. So this week, we plan to send the first cargo. This is about 20,000 tons from the Netherlands to Malawi. The main part of fertilizers, mainly in Latvia, was not even inspected because of Riga's refusal to allow inspectors of the World Food Programme of the UN to the inspection site. So the world should know not only his heroes, but anti-heroes as well. So we urge all stakeholders, and mainly the European Union, to make all needed efforts to transfer Russian fertilizers to the poorest countries in which they need. I can realize what would be done by the developed civilized countries, for example, Great Britain and the United States and Riga as well, if it started to put obstacles to supplies of the products which are vital to them. I can imagine how in 1 minute these Riga's officials would be denied visas because of some compromising documents against them. If the West says that it cares about poor states, so they have to use their full influence to make Riga, and not only Riga, to unblock this situation. As we know, the majority agricultural products of Ukraine, and this is mainly corn, in the framework of the Black Sea Initiative, is sent exactly to the European Union. The Africans receive only a small part, about 3% of all cargoes. So that is the attitude of this prosperous garden and jungles. So you said that you have some more questions. The second question concerning the statement of the counterintelligence head, who said that they expelled throughout the year more than 600 Russian diplomats, and that Great Britain denied visas to about 100 diplomats. Can you say how many European diplomats were expelled from Russia? As you know, this is a kind of a bad calculations, and I would like not to answer and to think over this issue because it is absurd and senseless. So I would like to provide concrete figures. If the Ken Macao, the chief of a counterintelligence service, MI5, when he started to count some spies from Russia, so I have a simple question to the British Embassy, to Great Britain, and as a proposal to you as a journalist. Would you like you, yourself as a journalist, to clarify, for example, in the British Embassy, to tell you as journalists and to us how many spies, British spies, or those who were engaged in the activities for the benefit of Great Britain remain on the territory of the Russian Federation? So how many British spies are here in Moscow? What salaries they receive? At least some basic information. As soon as they provide it to us, then we'll speak further. And I would like to underline once again, this question was raised when after Ken McCallum started to consider this issue. Before starting to talk about such issues, then you should deal with the situation in your home country. I have another question. President of France said that Russia holds a predator policy in Africa. I say that it is a kind of ideas, the same as Borrell's statements, some disrespectful, false behavior of the Western countries is an example when they retain their colonial logic and ideology. Today, all countries are sovereign, independent, and have the right for their own policy, both domestic and foreign. So that is why we do not understand why official Paris speaks out on behalf of the African continent, who has his own voice. It is exactly our country who helped the African states to obtain this vote and to develop it. The African continent has a right to vote for themselves and the right to say on behalf of their own. They do not need any mediation efforts on France. If they needed, so they would address to France. But they tolerated for a long time colonizers. So that is why they enjoy their freedom by adopting their sovereign decisions. Thank you. Do we have portal newsroom? Good afternoon, Madam Zakharova. Svetlana Rustam, we have several questions. The first one, Iran started uranium enrichment up to 60% at the nuclear facility in Fordo. The European Troika condemned such a decision and said that such steps are aimed at undermining the comprehensive plan of action on the Iranian nuclear deal. Does Moscow agree with such a reaction, and how Moscow responds to such Tehran's actions? So one moment. I have a message. As you know, as for Iran, the question concerned enrichment. I would like to recall that on the 22nd of November, the Director General of EIEA, in his information report, reaffirmed that Iran started to produce enrichment of uranium up to 60% in Fordo facility, as well as replacing the facilities to more modern and up-to-date models. We can mention that all changes in the Iranian nuclear program are undergoing under strict control from the EIEA. So that is exactly this agency which provides the information. So everything is in line with international standards. The report does not have any outcomes or assessments which can prove that Iran violates its non-proliferation commitments. All that is provided for by the NPT Treaty as well as the Agreement on Comprehensive Guarantees, Tehran strictly abides by. Of course, this is an uncomfortable for our Western colleagues truth. They're trying to hide it under various attacks on Iran. A week ago, the Western media said that it serves to the interests of the Western states. A week ago, they tried to attack the Council of MIA when they adopted another anti-Iranian resolution. As you know, Russia and Qatar, as well as a number of other members, did not support this destructive aspiration. Any practical consequences, of course, won't be. Nevertheless, it has negatively influenced on the prospects to revive the Joint Comprehensive Plan. So this is the concept developed by the Western states. The stubborn aspiration of Washington and its satellites, even its inability to complete this nuclear deal. I believe that our Western colleagues are surprised and even horrified by the fact that during these long-month negotiations, a solution was found, a solution to revitalize this comprehensive plan. Yes, I see that this is a fever, and it is very characteristic to the West. On the one hand, they demand such negotiations, and at the same time undermining it. We see a kind of a fever in order to find a comfortable pretext to get out of the game, to putting the blame for failed negotiations on Tehran. I hope that they will fail. So this report does not provide any proofs for this. No matter how loud the hysteria of the West against Iran, so they cannot ignore this plan, which was established in 2015, supported by the UN Security Council Resolution 2231, and helped to remove the issues, the questions to Iran, and to ensure maximum long-term transparency of nuclear deal, and to provide the shortest, saying that the shortest way to ensure the nuclear deal through strict compliance of all the parties, of all commitments. But the West does not like to implement such commitments when it is reminded of. This decision was elaborated in details in the Vienna format, but this was told just at the finish line. Our colleagues denied the resolution, but they kill the spirit of international organizations. They make resolutions which have nothing to do to international law, which is not only politicized, they are political declarations of one country or a group of states. So this is all false, and we've seen this before. That is why we urge Washington and the European capitals to abandon their selfish ideas and to think over this situation in order to restore and fully implement this joint comprehensive plan. So that is why this will lift any concerns regarding the Iranian enrichment program. As for us, we are ready to promote such a decision. Do we have channel real? Maybe you have some other questions. Yes, I have two other questions. Can you please be brief because I have another event? A summit of OECD was held. CSTO said that these member states should be regarded and should establish relations with other countries. Yesterday, during the session of the CSTO in Yerevan, the Minsk accepted its presidentship. So this question should be addressed to Minsk right now. And I would like to mention that CSTO has always remained open for dialogue with international organizations. It is ready to say, and I believe that the name of these organizations says for itself. This organization is ready for such a dialogue on an equal basis. Of course, there is a number of apparent areas where this cooperation will be mutually beneficial. I first of all talk about international terrorism, drug trafficking, information security, as well as other spheres where practical joint efforts will be quite relevant in order to maintain peace and security in the Eurasian region.
Back in the day, even NATO received a proposal to cooperate, but it did not respond. You can ask them why. In 2021, some documents came into effect. They solidified the status of the CSTO, the observer status and the partner status, and this provide for an opportunity for the organizations and partners to join in one of these capacities. As for the priority partners, we believe these are the CIS and the SCO. As for yesterday's events at the session of the Collective Security Council, heads of delegations signed a letter of intention to develop their cooperation with the CIS and the SCO, and we believe that this document will boost practical cooperation with these countries, with these organizations. Since 2004, these organizations have been observers to the United Nations. We signed a joint declaration between the cooperation between the UN and the CSTO, the sectoral contacts on counterterrorism committees, on Office on Drugs and Crime, and we are creating conditions for peacekeeping missions under the United Nations auspices. On the 21st of November this year, New York saw the signing of the 2-year program for cooperation between the UN and the CSTO. Unfortunately, over the past times, we see the anti-Russian sentiment with regard to the cooperation with the CSTO due to the Polish presidency within the OSCE, and the CSTO was removed from the list of invitees in violation of the many years of practice. We are outraged that these steps by the Polish chairmanship made it impossible for the foreign minister, Minister Lavrov, to participate in the ministerial event, and we have repeatedly stated that. All the documents are published on our website. Do you have any other questions? Yes. Last question. Yesterday, the CSTO discussed the Armenian-Azerbaijani settlement. Previously, Nikol Pashinyan stated that with regard to the Russian proposals on peaceful treaty between Baku and Yerevan, these proposals envisage to delay this Karabakh status ad infinitum, but the Azeri side has repeatedly stated that this is unacceptable. Could you confirm the statement of the Armenian Prime Minister? Well, and what is the take of the Kremlin? Well, you should ask the Kremlin for its opinion. We have separation of responsibilities. As for the peaceful treaty, just like other issues in the Armenian-Azeri normalization, these are all complicated and sensitive, and we don't think that it is reasonable to comment on the parties' positions before we reach some specific arrangements, and this was repeatedly stated, including during briefings. On the 14th of November, Yerevan welcomed Special Representative of Russian Foreign Minister on normalization between Azerbaijan and Armenia, Igor Khovayev. He had a number of consultations with the Armenian political leadership. Currently, he is paying a visit to Baku. He has meetings with the Azeri side, and they discussed the peaceful treaty as well. Do we have Veryalk with us? Yes, good afternoon. I have two questions, Madam Zakharova. The first one. Despite the trilateral statement during the recent negotiations in Sochi, where parties agreed to abstain from the use of force or threat of force, the president of Azerbaijan also voices threats against Armenia. At the same time, Azerbaijan shells the positions of Armenia and civilians in Artsakh. There are civilian casualties, and these were recorded by Russian peacekeepers. What's Moscow's take on these flagrant violations of the arrangements by Baku? And how will these arrangements be implemented? We believe that it is necessary to implement the provisions of the trilateral agreements between the leaders, including the ones that were reached in Sochi in October, including the ones that have to do with the use of force and threat of force. It is important to abstain from the confrontation rhetorics. Russia maintains regular contacts with both sides, both at the political level, including heads of state and foreign ministers, as well as on the ground at the level of Russian peacekeeping troops and the border service of Russian security service, including to prevent armed incidents. We will continue our effort to normalize Armenian and Azerbaijani relations in order to establish peace in Southern Caucasus. Thank you. Not so long ago, in his interview to Argumenty and Fakty, Vice Speaker Konstantin Kosachev said that the conflict between Armenia and Azerbaijan is not within the CSTO purview. It has received a negative outcry in Armenia. I would like to know the position of the Russian MFA and how relevant are these statements a few days before the summit in Yerevan. Well, the most interesting thing is that I hear this question from a media representative from an Armenian media, where political assessments and considerations are voiced on a broad range of issues. By the way, sometimes they are totally different in the run-up to the events and following the events, during the events, since we're democratic societies and we have experts, politicians, political scientists that are entitled to voice their viewpoint, their expert viewpoint on various developments, or we can deviate from this principle. So let me start from this. As for the CSTO, I beg your pardon, but yesterday it was said that the situation in the Armenian-Azeri border has been discussed, just like the normalization of bilateral relationship between Yerevan and Baku. It was covered within the CSTO. So I believe that that answers your question. This was your second question, I believe, and I have already answered the first one. Thank you. Do you have the Moscow Post with us? Good day, Madam Zakharova. I also have a couple of questions, but they are brief. Gazprom stated that Moldova captures gas from the gas pipeline via the Ukrainian territory. How would you address this problem? Gazprom comments on this matter. You should ask them. And we have repeatedly noted that all issues that have to do with the supplies to Moldova are within the purview of Gazprom. Thank you. A second question on the shellings of the Zaporozhye nuclear power plant. Of course, you mentioned that already. Did you have any contacts at the foreign ministry level with those states that have an influence on Kiev, Turkey, France, other countries, and what is your assessment of the IAEA role? We take active efforts to stabilize the situation around the Zaporozhye nuclear power plant and preventing threats of the Kiev regime that continues to shell the power plant and the adjacent territory. As for the source of threat, that is an open secret to everyone. Whether the observers have the courage to call a spade, but everybody understands, both within the United Nations and within the IAEA and in the capitals, including those who directly mentor the Kiev regime. This self-destructive course of the Ukrainian authorities are of serious concern not only to Russia. Arrangements with the IAEA on its long-term stay at the Zaporozhye nuclear power plant is something that we achieved at a high cost, and it has become a step in the right direction. For some time, it forced the Kiev regime to be more careful, although shellings close to the power plant and attempts to make provocations, including with regard to the power plant personnel. This has not stopped, not for a single day. As for the recent developments, the situation has significantly aggravated. The armed forces of Ukraine are conducting criminal activities. They resumed their artillery shellings against the power plant. The Kiev realizes what they are doing. They are shelling critical elements of the power plant, and by doing so, the war crimes in Kiev are putting humanity close to a man-made disaster with disastrous consequences. They are aiming nuclear power plant in Zaporozhye, but the thing is that the whole world is at the crosshairs. Suicidal balancing on the verge of life and death is a hallmark of the Kiev regime. It is ready to drag the rest of the world into this political abyss. The West understands that. They try to turn a blind eye to these obvious things, to these war crimes, to nuclear blackmail. They try to explain this mayhem by the Kiev regime, but that is just aiding and abetting, maybe egging on new crimes. We have repeatedly called on all countries, including those who are closely working with Zelensky and those who make photo ops with these barbarians, and we urge them to do their utmost so that the shellings of Zaporozhye nuclear power plant to stop forever. Thank you. And thank you. Media Alliance of Russian Communities. Yes, we're always with you, Madam Zakharova. Soon we'll celebrate a great anniversary, 100th anniversary of the USSR. Many millions of our compatriots were born in this country. Russia is a successor to the Soviet Union. Do you plan to celebrate this anniversary, and what is the scale of the celebration? At the state level, we do not plan to do that, but a number of public organizations planned festivities to mark this landmark event that has become a part of Russian and Soviet history, and we will provide you with the list of these events, providing all the links. During today's briefing transcript, indeed, on the 30th of December 1922, the first All-Union Congress of Councils adopted the Treaty on the Soviet Union. I thank you for your attention, dear friends, and I wish you question. I'm really sorry. I'm ready to take a question. Sorry for that. Madam Zakharova, what is the attitude of the Russian MFA, the EU resolution stating that Russia is the sponsor of terrorism? We have briefly commented on that. Today, with regard to this political campaign, we will brief a comment by Deputy Foreign Minister Mr. Cyril Molotov. It is currently being prepared, and it will provide you with a detailed outlook of what the West is doing on this track. Thanks a lot. Thank you.